She is 54. Her weight has not changed in 15 years. Not dramatically, not within the range of seasonal fluctuation that most people experience and manage and stress about. Not changed. The number on the scale she stepped on this morning is the number that was there when she was 39. And the number that will be there, in all likelihood, when she is 69. She has never been on a diet. Not the kind with a name, not the kind with a book, not the kind where you track something in an app and feel virtuous when the numbers agree with you, and something adjacent to shame when they don't. She has never cut a carbohydrate, eliminated a food group, replaced a meal with a powder, or entered a calorie into any kind of log. She does not own a food scale. She does not know what a macronutrient is in the tactical sense, not because she hasn't been told, but because the information has never been necessary. You are watching her eat breakfast. She is eating rice and miso soup and a small dish of pickled vegetables and a piece of grilled fish. This has been her breakfast, or something very like it, for as long as she can remember. She eats with the specific unhurriedness of someone for whom eating has never been an event requiring management. She does not count anything. She does not feel guilty about anything. She does not plan what she will eat later as a way of compensating for what she is eating now. She finishes. She is not full in the way of someone who has had enough. She is satisfied in a different sense, in the sense of someone whose body received exactly what it needed and received a clear signal, at a specific moment, that the receiving was complete. The plate is not empty. She left food on it. Not because she was being disciplined, because she was done. And somewhere else right now, in a kitchen that is probably not in Kyoto, someone is finishing their breakfast protein shake, entering it into their tracking app, calculating what they have left for the day, and beginning the particular kind of morning that has hunger in it, before it has barely begun. The diet industry will tell you these two people are making different choices. Japan will tell you something more fundamental than that. Japan will tell you one of them is eating, and the other one is managing, and that the managing is, at the level of hormones and biology, the thing that is making the managing necessary. The global weight loss industry is worth approximately $250 billion. That number has grown every year for the last 3 decades. In the same period, in most of the countries where the diet industry is largest, obesity rates have also grown every year. This is not a coincidence, and it is not a paradox. It is the predictable outcome of an industry built on a solution that generates more of the problem it is claiming to solve. Here is what most people have never been told about diets. Diets work, in the short term, consistently, for almost everyone who commits to them. Weight is lost, numbers change, the before and after is real, and then, in the overwhelming majority of cases, multiple long-term studies put the figure at 80 to 95% of dieters. The weight returns, usually within 2 years, usually slightly more than was lost, and usually accompanied by a metabolic landscape that is measurably worse than the one that existed before the diet began. This is not a willpower failure, it is a hormonal response, and the hormone at the center of it is one that the diet industry has spent 50 years designing products around without ever addressing: leptin. And Japan, without a diet industry to speak of, without a culture of caloric restriction or food tracking, or the particular collective anxiousness about eating that characterizes most of the Western world, has had obesity rates hovering below 5% for decades, while the rest of the industrialized world watched its numbers climb. The reason is not genetics. The research on this is unambiguous. Japanese people who move to Western countries and adopt Western eating patterns develop Western obesity rates within a generation. The difference is not in the body. It is in the relationship the culture built between the person and the food. 5 things. Not 5 rules, not 5 restrictions. 5 ways of understanding food that produce, over a lifetime, the body that never needed a diet to stay where it was. Leptin is a hormone produced by fat cells. Its job, in the most direct terms, is to tell the brain when the body has had enough. When fat stores are sufficient, leptin travels through the bloodstream to the hypothalamus, the same hormonal command center that governs cortisol and melatonin and the satiety signals from the gut, and says, "You are fed. You do not need to eat more. You can stop." This system is elegant and ancient. In a body that is eating the way human bodies evolved to eat, it works precisely. The fat cells produce leptin proportional to their stores. The brain receives the signal. Hunger is quieted. The body maintains a stable weight not through discipline but through chemistry. Here is what dieting does to this system. When caloric intake is reduced, when the body is put in the deliberate energy deficit that all diets require, it interprets this not as a lifestyle choice but as a famine. The body does not distinguish between a controlled caloric deficit and a food shortage. It responds the same way it has responded to food shortages for hundreds of thousands of years. It reduces leptin production to lower the threshold, increases ghrelin production to raise hunger, and slows the metabolic rate to make the available food last longer. Dr. Rudy Leibel at Columbia University has documented this process in detail. His research found that people who had lost weight showed leptin levels significantly lower than equally lean people who had never dieted. The body had reset its hormonal baseline in response to the restriction, and when the diet ended, the hunger that returned was not the same hunger that existed before the diet. It was the hunger of a body that had been taught, at a cellular level, that food is scarce and that storage is urgent. The diet made the body better at gaining weight. Japan did not solve this with a better diet. Japan solved it by never creating the problem, by building a relationship between people and food that kept the leptin system functioning as it was designed to function, without interference, without restriction, without the particular cortisol response that dietary stress produces, and that further disrupts the hormonal systems that govern weight. Here is what that relationship looks like. You have heard of hara hachibu. Eat until you are 80% full. The Okinawan principle, approximately 2,000 years old, that has been cited in Blue Zone's research and longevity studies, and every article ever written about why Japanese people don't get fat. You know the concept. You have nodded at it. You have perhaps tried to implement it. But here is what almost every Western account of hara hachibu gets wrong. It is not a portion control strategy. It is not a rule about how much to eat. It is not a way of eating less. It is a description of a relationship with the body's own signals, a relationship so precisely calibrated, through a lifetime of eating without distraction, and without guilt, and without the noise of an industry telling you that your appetite cannot be trusted, that the signal itself becomes the guide. The signal is this. The gut produces satiety hormones, primarily GLP-1, peptide YY, and cholecystokinin, approximately 20 minutes after eating begins. These hormones travel to the hypothalamus and register as fullness. In a body that is eating slowly, without distraction, in a culture that has never told it its hunger is a problem to be managed, this signal arrives clearly. The person eating feels it, they stop. The 80% is not a measurement. It is the name for the moment when the signal is arriving, and the body is already beginning to feel it, even before it peaks. The person who eats to hara hachibu is not using willpower to eat less. They are paying attention to their own biology. But here is the finding that the diet industry has never wanted you to understand. This calibration, this ability to hear the signal and act on it, is disrupted by restriction. A body that has been chronically dieted develops leptin resistance. The signal is produced, but the brain no longer receives it accurately. The person eats past hara hachibu not because they lack discipline, but because the signal has been compromised, and then they go on another diet, which further compromises the signal. She has never dieted. Her leptin system has never been disrupted. The signal arrives clearly, every meal, and she follows it. Not as a practice, as the ordinary relationship between a person and her own body that has never been interfered with. In 2005, Japan passed a law. Not a law about what to eat, not a dietary guideline or a nutrition recommendation or a government endorsement of a specific food pyramid, a law about how to think about food. The Shokuiku Basic Act, shoku meaning food, iku meaning education, mandated that food education be incorporated into the national school curriculum alongside literacy and mathematics, not as a health class, as a fundamental competency, as essential to the development of a functioning person as the ability to read. Shokuiku does not teach children to count calories. It does not teach them about nutrients in the quantitative sense of proteins and carbohydrates and fats and their respective gram weights. It teaches something more fundamental and more durable: the relationship between food and the body, between food and the season, between food and the people who grew it and prepared it, between food and the experience of eating it. A child educated through shokiku grows up with a vocabulary for food that most Western adults have never developed. Not the vocabulary of macros and calories and cheat days and clean eating. The vocabulary of, what is this? Where did it come from? What season does it belong to? What does it do in my body? How does it feel to eat it? When have I had enough? This vocabulary is not neutral. The body of evidence on intuitive eating, the approach to food that teaches people to reconnect with hunger and satiety signals rather than external rules, consistently shows that people who develop the capacity to hear and respond to their own body's signals maintain lower BMI, more stable weight, and better metabolic markers than those who follow external dietary rules. Not because intuitive eating is a diet, because it is the end of the need for one. Shokuiku is not intuitive eating as a program. It is the cultural infrastructure that makes intuitive eating the default, the foundation that Japan built before anyone in the West had coined the phrase. She did not learn shokiku in a book. She absorbed it the way you absorb language, from the world around her, from the kitchen her mother ran, from the meals that arrived at the table with a relationship to the season and the body built into their structure before she was old enough to articulate why. You are watching her at 3 p.m. She is working. The afternoon is at its natural low ebb, the cortisol curve having crested in the morning, the energy settling into the particular quality of mid-afternoon that most people treat as a problem to be solved with food or caffeine. She does not eat anything. She does not look for anything to eat. The afternoon is simply the afternoon, and it will end, and dinner will come, and in the specific relationship her body has maintained with mealtimes for her entire life, the dinner is enough to wait for. This is the third thing Japan understands about food that most of the Western world has medicalized into a symptom. Not snacking is not a dietary rule in Japan. It is not something she is refraining from. It is the simple absence of a habit that was never built. Here is what snacking does to the hormonal architecture of the day. Insulin, the hormone that manages blood glucose, is produced every time food is consumed. When food is eaten continuously throughout the day, insulin is elevated continuously. Elevated insulin inhibits fat mobilization, the process by which the body accesses stored fat for energy. A body that is snacking throughout the day is a body that cannot access its own fat stores, regardless of how much it is eating or how carefully it is tracking. But there is a second mechanism. The cephalic phase digestive response, the anticipatory digestive activation triggered by the sight, smell, and thought of food, produces a small cortisol spike every time it is triggered. Every time you see food, think about food, scroll past an image of food, consider whether you want a snack. Your cortisol rises fractionally. In a snacking culture where food is thought about continuously, this fractional rise accumulates. Across a day, across a week, across the decade in which you have been dieting without quite understanding why the weight keeps returning, it contributes to the chronic low cortisol elevation that promotes abdominal fat storage. She does not think about food between meals because she does not need to. The meals are sufficient, the body knows they are coming, and the hormonal architecture of her day is built on 3 peaks of insulin and 3 periods of natural fat mobilization in between, exactly as the human metabolic system was designed to function. The tray she ate from this morning was not assembled casually. 1 soup, 3 sides, rice. The structure of Ichiju Sansai, the organizing principle of the Japanese meal, that has not changed in any fundamental way since it was codified in the 8th century. Not because Japan has been resistant to change, but because a meal structure that produces metabolic stability and satiety across a lifetime turns out not to require updating. Here is what the structure does that the Western meal, the large plate of 1 or 2 things, cannot. The fermented component, the miso, the pickled vegetable, arrives first, activating the gut microbiome and priming the digestive system with beneficial bacteria that improve leptin sensitivity. A gut microbiome fed fermented foods regularly is a gut microbiome that receives and transmits satiety signals more accurately. The bacteria that signal fullness are more numerous. The brain receives a cleaner signal. The protein and the vegetable components, braised, steamed, raw, arrive in quantities that are small relative to a Western meal, but that, in combination with the rice and the soup, produce a total nutritional picture that satisfies every dimension of hunger: volume, taste, texture, temperature, nutrition. The meal is not designed to be abundant. It is designed to be complete. The rice, particularly short-grain Japanese rice, has a specific glycemic response when eaten as part of a mixed meal with fermented and protein components. The fiber in the fermented vegetable slows the absorption of the rice's glucose. The protein blunts the insulin response. The net effect is a blood glucose curve that rises gently, sustains evenly, and declines gradually over the 2 to 3 hours following the meal. Not the spike and crash of a high-carbohydrate Western breakfast. A plateau. That plateau is the opposite of hunger. It is the metabolic foundation of a morning that does not produce cravings before noon, a morning that does not create the blood sugar emergency that most of the Western world treats with a mid-morning snack. She did not build this meal. The culture built it for her. The structure arrived with her education, her mother's kitchen, the particular way that rice and miso soup and 3 sides have always been arranged on the trays of the people around her. And the structure, functioning correctly over 54 years, produced the body that has never needed a diet. The last thing she does that you have not done in longer than you can honestly remember. She eats as if the meal is the reason she sat down. Not as if the meal is a task to complete while the phone keeps running. Not as if the meal is a management exercise whose caloric components need to be entered and accounted for. Not as if the meal is a guilty pleasure, or a reward for behavior, or a moment of weakness that will require compensation. The meal is the meal. She sat down for it. She is here for it. She will be here until it is finished. And when it is finished, she will be done with it in a way that most people who eat while scrolling never quite are. Because the meal that is only half attended to is a meal that the brain only half registers, and the body that half registers a meal goes looking for the other half an hour later. The research on this is extensive and consistent. People who eat while distracted consume on average 25 to 50% more in the meal and more in the hours following the meal than people who eat with full attention. The distracted brain does not log the meal. The satiety signal, arriving to a brain that was elsewhere during the eating, registers with less clarity and less persistence. The hunger returns faster, and then the calorie count goes up, and then the diet begins again. She does not eat with full attention because she read a study. She eats with full attention because in the culture she grew up in, the meal was always the thing being done. The meal happened at a table. It happened without screens because there were no screens, and then later with screens nearby but not at the table, and now with a phone in another room, not because she made a decision about where to keep her phone, but because the meal has always been where she was, entirely. 54 years. No diet, weight unchanged. Not the same story. The same meal, eaten the same way, at the same table, in the same relationship to the body that produced it and the season it came from, and the person sitting down to eat it. That is the explanation. Not genetics, not discipline, not a strategy, a relationship with food that was never broken and therefore never needed to be fixed. You watched her finish breakfast and leave food on the plate. You are still thinking about it. Not the food, the leaving of it. The specific quality of a person who stopped, not because the plate was empty, not because the rule said stop, not because she was entering the meal in a log and had reached her allowance, because she was done, because the signal arrived and she heard it, and she trusted it, and she acted on it without negotiation. That signal is available to you. It was always available to you. But for everyone who has been through the cycle, the diet that worked, the weight that returned, the next diet, the next return, the growing hunger between meals, and the growing suspicion that something in the system is broken, the signal has been disrupted. Not destroyed, disrupted. And what disrupts it can, with time and without interference, begin to heal. The research on leptin sensitivity restoration is encouraging. Studies have shown that periods of eating without restriction, eating when hungry, stopping when the signal arrives, choosing foods that support rather than inflame the gut microbiome, avoiding the chronic low-grade cortisol of dietary stress, allow leptin sensitivity to begin recovering within weeks. Not fully, not immediately, but measurably. The signal becomes cleaner. The brain begins to receive it again. 5 things, not 5 rules to follow. 5 ways of relating to food that, practiced consistently, allow the system to function the way it was designed to. Hara Hachibu. Not eating to 80% by measurement, but learning, gradually, to hear the signal that was always trying to arrive. Shokuiku. Replacing the nutritional vocabulary of restriction and tracking with the simpler vocabulary of what is this, where did it come from, and how does it feel in my body? The absence of snacking, not as a rule, but as a natural consequence of meals that are sufficient and eaten with enough attention that the body actually registers having had them. Ichiju Sansai, the meal structure that does the metabolic work without requiring its eater to know that it is doing it. And eating as if the meal is the reason you sat down, the table without the phone, the meal fully attended, the body given the conditions it needs to receive what it was given. Tonight, one shift. Not a diet, not a restriction, not a number to track. Tonight, put the phone in another room before dinner. Sit down, eat the meal. When something in your body begins to say that you have had enough, before the plate is empty, earlier than you expect, put the fork down, not as a rule, as an experiment. See what the body says when it is finally given the quiet to say it. She has been listening to hers for 54 years. Her plate still has food on it. Her weight has not changed in 15. You do not need a diet. You need a different relationship with the meal. It starts tonight, at the table, without the phone. That is all. Share this with someone who has tried every diet and keeps arriving back where they started. They may not have a discipline problem. They may have a relationship problem with the meal and with the signal they were never taught to hear.